Sandra was a bright, imaginative girl of 10, living in a quiet village with her parents. The home she knew was warm, filled with love, but it also had a certain air of mystery. On this particular evening, Sandra was playing in her bedroom, immersed in her own world of dolls and daydreams, when her mother's voice echoed through the house. "Sandra! Come here. I have something to ask you," her mother called from the kitchen. Sandra hesitated. There was something unsettling in her mother's tone, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. Reluctantly, she walked to the kitchen, heart pounding faster with each step. Her mother stood by the counter, her back turned, staring at the empty cake platter. "Do you know who ate the cakes meant for the guests?" Her mother's voice was calm, too calm. Sandra swallowed hard. "Oh. No, I don't know," she lied, her small hands trembling behind her back. Her mother turned around slowly, her eyes piercing through Sandra as if she could see right into her soul. "Sandra, did you eat the cakes?" she asked again, her voice steady but filled with a strange intensity. "No, Mom, I didn't," Sandra replied, her voice barely a whisper. She could feel the lie choking her, tightening around her throat like an invisible noose. "Sandra!" Her mother began, walking closer, her presence now menacing. "A thief always starts out by lying. The police always catch a thief. And thieves are always punished." Her mother's eyes gleamed in the dim light of the kitchen. Sandra's legs felt weak as the weight of her guilt pressed down on her. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry," she cried, her voice cracking. "I ate the cakes. I'm so sorry." Her mother smiled softly, almost too kindly, but there was something wrong about the way her face twisted in the shadows. There, she said, stroking Sandra's hair. "It's good you told the truth. I don't like liars, Sandra. Never lie to me again, or else." Life went back to normal, or so Sandra thought. A few weeks later, her mother brought home a newborn baby, and everything changed. Dora, the tiny fragile bundle of life, instantly became the center of attention. Sandra tried to be happy, tried to love her baby sister as her mother had asked, but something dark was growing inside her. Dora's cries echoed through the house day and night, and Sandra could feel her patience slipping away like sand through her fingers. Her mother was always with Dora now, leaving Sandra to fend for herself. Sandra watched them from the shadows, jealousy gnawing at her heart, an emotion she had never felt before. "Mom, I'm sick of the crying." Sandra finally exploded one evening, unable to contain her frustration any longer. "I can't think. I can't study with all this noise." "You need to understand," her mother replied coldly, without even looking at her. "Dora is a baby. You are her big sister now. Be responsible." Sandra's protests fell on deaf ears. Her mother's attention remained solely on Dora, leaving Sandra feeling more alone than ever. "You never have time for me anymore," Sandra sobbed one night after another failed attempt to get her mother's attention. "You used to cuddle me, take me places. Now it's all about Dora." Her mother's voice was distant and cold. "You're old enough to go by yourself. Stop being selfish, Sandra." Something broke inside Sandra. Rage, pure and venomous, surged through her like a storm. "I hate you," she screamed, her voice raw with emotion, before running upstairs to lock herself in her room. That night, the resentment festered, and something darker stirred in Sandra's dreams. Sandra awoke in the dead of night, her room bathed in eerie moonlight. The house was silent except for the soft wail of the wind outside. But something was wrong. She felt it in the pit of her stomach, a sensation like icy fingers crawling up her spine. She rose from her bed, her feet cold against the wooden floor, and found herself moving through the dark house. In her dream, or was it a dream, she tiptoed into her mother's room, where the soft, rhythmic breathing of her mother and Dora filled the air. Without a sound, Sandra reached into the crib and lifted her sister into her arms. In the cold pale moonlight, Sandra carried Dora to the garden, her body moving as if under someone else's control. The garden shed loomed in the distance, and inside, she found a rusty shovel. With trembling hands, she dug a shallow grave in the wet earth. The sound of the shovel scraping the dirt echoing in the stillness. The whole time, Dora's tiny face stared up at her, serene and quiet. When the hole was deep enough, Sandra placed Dora inside and covered her with dirt. The baby's eyes closed as the soil touched her skin. Sandra jolted awake, her heart racing, her body drenched in sweat. She could still feel the cold earth beneath her hands, the weight of the shovel, the sight of her baby sister disappearing beneath the ground. It was just a dream, she told herself. Just a horrible, horrible dream. But the unease wouldn't leave her. The dream felt too real, too vivid. She sat up in bed, her breath shallow and rapid. She needed to see Dora, to prove to herself that the baby was safe and sound. Just as she was about to rise, her bedroom door flew open. Her mother stood in the doorway, wild-eyed and frantic, tears streaming down her face. "Sandra! Dora is missing," her mother cried, her voice raw with panic. "Do you know where she is?" "She wasn't in her crib when I woke up." Sandra's heart stopped. The dream, had it been real? No, it couldn't be. She had been asleep, hadn't she? "I don't know," Sandra whispered, her voice trembling. Her mother's desperate eyes searched her face, suspicion flickering behind the fear. "Are you sure, Sandra? You're not lying to me, are you?" Her mother's voice became sharp, accusing. "You know what happens to liars." Sandra gulped, the weight of her mother's words crushing her. "No, I swear," she lied again, her voice shaking. The search for Dora consumed the house. They looked everywhere, under the beds, in closets, even in the attic. But the baby was nowhere to be found. As her mother wept, falling to her knees in despair, Sandra's gaze drifted out the window to the garden, where a small mound of earth caught her eye. Her stomach churned. Could it really be? Her mother noticed the direction of Sandra's stare. "Sandra." Her voice was cold, dangerous now. "You know something, don't you?" Sandra's legs gave out. She pointed a trembling finger at the mound of earth in the garden, unable to speak, unable to lie anymore. Her mother rushed outside, her footsteps frantic against the soft ground. She clawed at the mound with her bare hands, dirt flying in all directions. When her fingers finally touched something soft, she let out a blood-curdling scream. "No! God, no!" she wailed, pulling out Dora's limp body from the shallow grave. Sandra could only stand in the doorway, frozen in terror, unable to explain, unable to comprehend how her nightmare had become a reality. Her mother turned to her, eyes filled with a kind of madness Sandra had never seen before. "You killed her!" she shrieked. "You killed your sister because you were jealous." "No. I didn't mean to," Sandra cried, stepping back, her voice full of horror. But her mother was beyond reason. She lunged at Sandra, her hands wrapping around her daughter's throat. The rage was all-consuming, and in that moment, all Sandra could feel was the cold, relentless grip of her mother's hands, squeezing the life out of her. Just as Sandra's world faded to black, a loud knock echoed through the house, breaking the madness. Her mother released her grip, and Sandra collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. At the door stood their neighbor, cradling a crying Dora in his arms. "We found her crawling around outside," he said. "She must have gotten out of her crib during the night. Good thing we found her before something bad happened." What do you think really happened? Please like and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories.